Nestled in the outskirts of the California foothills lies a little railroad. A little standard gauge railroad. A little standard gauge railroad that has a lot to say about itself. From steam to blue and white to black and orange to a collection of colors, this was the Amador Central Railroad, or post 1998, the Amador Foothills Railroad.
"僕の子犬がいなくなった」「白い足白い尻尾」「ずっと一緒だったのに」僕の子犬がいなくなった」「白い耳白い背中」「いつも一緒だったのに」僕は乾いた涙で毎日暮らしてる早く帰ってきて雨の日も風の日も毎日散歩してあげるだから早く帰ってきて
The date is April 24th, 1904. In the small town of Ione, California, a new railroad was formed, the Ione and Eastern. This railroad was planning to build a line between Ione and Sutter Creek, 14 miles to the east. They also promised that they would extend the line another 13 miles to Volcano, California. However, the railroad was overly ambitious, as it only managed to build the line from Ione all the way to Martel before the INE filed for bankruptcy. So, what happened next? Well, in 1908, a man named Charles Erickson purchased the Ione and Eastern and reorganized it to the Amador Central Railroad. However, he died before the railroad really flourished, so his wife, Meta Erickson, took control of the railroad in 1910, being the first and so far the only woman president of a railroad. The railroad would struggle through the Great Depression with two of the railroad's largest customers, the Argonaut and Kennedy mines, closing, passenger service being halted permanently in 1932, 5 of 12 wooden trestles burning in 1935 and 1939, and a roundhouse burning in Martel in November 1939. The rail line also filed for abandonment in 1938, but two local businesses in Ione and Martel reorganized the line, and a new lumber mill in Martel in 1940 was built, thus suspending the abandonment and increasing revenue. That increase in revenue, however, was short-lived, as World War II would close a couple of mines that had reopened earlier. The railroad would then be purchased in 1945 by the Winton Lumber Company in Martel. WLC could improve the railroad, and would improve the railroad, with the most notable changes being in replacing the wooden turntable in Martel, the replacing of rail with heavier rail, and dieselization. We'll get back to the history of the railroad, such as the second rebrand, and ownership by the Georgia Pacific and Sierra Pacific later. The line between Ione and Martel is short with only 11.8 miles. It starts at the interchange with the former Southern Pacific, now Union Pacific, Ione Industrial Lead, and heads eastbound. The line crosses California State Route 124 before passing Firebrick, California, curving northbound. Crossing State Route 104, passing again over the famous Girder Bridge, and a third time at the well-known crossing at Sunnybrook, the midpoint of the Amador Central, and then before reaching Martel, the line intersects Highway 88 twice before reaching the town. All of this on an up to 3% grade. No wonder why the Ione and Eastern Amador Central use shays, but we'll get to that. We'll go as far as the Ione and Eastern days. The INE started running its steam engines after reaching Mountain Springs. These consisted of 440 No. 1, built in 1881 by Portland as Northern Pacific Railway 205, and 2 Lima-built Shays, a 3-truck Shay built in 1904, numbered 2, and a 2-truck Shay built in 1905, numbered 3. All 3 engines were transferred to Amador Central's ownership, where they became AMC's 1, 2, and 3 respectively. McKay and Aldous 1866 built 060 No. 4, and Schenectady 1875 built 460 No. 5 came from the Central Pacific as CP-21 Tamaroo and CP-189 respectively. Both engines had went from CP to Southern Pacific, renumbered to 1524 and 1554, and again to 1055 for number 4, as was rebuilt from a 460 to an 060, and to 2023 for number 5. 262, 6, and 7 were built in 1906 and 1901 respectively. 6 came from the Klamath Railroad as their number 1, while 7 used to be the McLeod Railroad number 8. Both 6 and 7, along with 7's sister 9, were built by the Baldwin Locomotive Works. Speaking of 9, that engine also worked for the Amador Central, but was never lettered for it. It was built the same year that 7 was, 1901, and was also a 262, being the sister of 7, of course. 9 was built from McLeod as their number 9, and came from the Eureka Western. However, starting in the 1940s, the Amador Central started to dieselize under the Winton Lumber Company's ownership. And, well, spoilers, dead by 1942, buried, dead by 1945, also dead by 1945, and the McLeod sisters were spared. I'll go more into this later. Dieselization started with 1945 built number 8, a 44-ton built by General Electric. 8 was the only new build engine for the Amador Central. 8, however, would then be replaced by the 2 engines that, if you know about the Amador Central, you would know exactly what they were. I'm talking about the 2 Baldwin S12s, 9 and 10. 9 came from Sharon Steel, built in 1951 as their number 1, while 10 came from the Southern Pacific as 2121, originally built in 1952 as Texas and New Orleans 105. 9 was a special case, as this unit wore a special yellow and black livery and was actually promoted by her maker, Baldwin Lima Hamilton, for its rebuilt 606 SC. It would eventually be repainted into blue to match 10. However, 9 and 10 were replaced by 2 EMD SWs, SW1200 number 11, built as Ashley Drew and Northern 178 in 1963, and SW7 number 12, built as Arkansas and Louisiana Missouri 11 in 1950, oddly featuring a cab seen on the older NW models and the SW1. These 2 would last until the second rebrand of the Amador Central. So, we come back to the history of the Amador Central, where we jump to the 1980s. In 1988, the Amador Central would be purchased by the Georgia Pacific Corporation in June. This did not change much with the Amador Central, it still had the same 2 Baldwins running, but then as the late 80s slowly evolved to the late 90s, that's when something big would happen. Sierra Pacific Industries acquired Georgia Pacific in early 1997 and shut down the Amador Central, with the last AMC freight run happening on March 28th. However, the line would then open again in 1999, becoming the Amador Foothills Railroad. And this was the one that brought big changes. The EMDs were kicked off the roster, 9 became a part source for 10, and 10 would be repainted into black with orange highlights and would have its M5 replaced with a K5LA. But Sierra Pacific forgot to consider one thing: track condition, which would ultimately lead to the Amador Foothills Railroad closing on June 7, 2004. A whole 100 years of the line since the Ione and Eastern days. The Martel Depot was torn down in 2007, and the rails were pulled up at the second crossing of Highway 88. Despite AFRR's short living, however, the line does get a happy ending. In 2011, the Amador Foothills Railroad was sold for exactly $1. No, I'm not joking. It was sold to the Amador County Historical Society and the Recreational Railroad Coalition. The railroad changed its name back to the Amador Central Railroad after petitioning to the Federal Railroad Administration. Today, 6 miles of the line is run once a month by speeders. It was postponed during COVID, but came back when that started to calm down. So, what happened to the locomotives then? Unfortunately, none of the Iron and Eastern engines survived. One was sent to the Southern Pacific after retirement in 1910 and was scrapped at an unknown date. 2 ended up at Metropolitan Redwood and would be scrapped by 1942. 3 went to the Great Western Power Company and ended up scrapped at an unknown date as well. 4 was sent to Stone and Western and then Modesto and Empire Traction before it was scrapped. 5 and 6 were retired in 1945 and scrapped. 7, nicknamed Iron Ivan, was retired in 1945 as well, but was then donated and preserved in Ione, where it still sits today. 9 was the McLeod sibling with a more eventful history, however. After retirement in 45, 9 went to the Nez Perce and Idaho Railroad, was donated to Continental Railroad Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, was restored to steam in the 1970s for the Kettle Moraine Scenic Railroad, and now sits preserved at the Age of Steam Roundhouse in Sugar Creek, Ohio as of 2015. As for the diesels, 8 was retired in 1974 and sent to the Colorado Fuel and Iron, numbered 32. Its current whereabouts are unknown. 9 was used as a part source until 2007, where it would be scrapped in Martel. 10 is currently stored in Ione under private ownership. What the plans for the locomotive are unknown. 11 and 12 went to the Quincy Railroad in 1997, where as of 2011, they are still working. The line had gone through over 100 years of constant abuse, and yet, while there are lines like the Modoc Northern that still operate under other railroads, unfortunately, there's just some that are simply torn up, like the Eagle Mountain Railroad. It really means a lot for a line to be preserved, seeing how railroads have helped shape society for more than 200 years, and the Amador Central is no exception. From shays to S12s to speeder cars, the line really does have a happy ending, something you don't just see on a lot of short lines.